When a comic goes very dark and gritty, when it goes seemingly into very heavy topics, the heroes are acting in a more aggressive way than they should, or normally do, I should say. Why do they do this? Is it as simple as a cheap sales ploy? Is it a kind of reaction to other things? There's a lot of reasons why comic books go more dark, and I want to get into some of those. Hey everybody, this is Perch. If you've read comic books for a long time, and this is one of those things I think you really only notice if you've been at it and reading comics and kind of living that world for 20 years, 30 years, because this stuff is cyclical. It never sticks around for long. And it just really came to my attention again as I'm doing that Avengers series. And you can see from the relaunches, you get kind of bright and optimistic Avengers, you get the dark and gritty Avengers, you get the Bendis does Mighty Avengers, and it's Iron Man and it's Miss Marvel, and they're going to kind of shine a beacon of light into things. And then we go Dark Avengers with Norman Osborn. Then we're back to light again. And it's you have these moments where comics seem to go in one direction or another. And the simple answer for why they go dark is that it's a sales ploy. It's like that's one way to kind of jolt people. This dates back to the 70s when you'd have somebody in this issue will die, and it wasn't a trick. I guess you could go even back further, and you would get a lot of Superman love to have the misleading covers or titles, or it's like, why is Superman evil? Will Superman die? You knew he wasn't going to die. But then you got into kind of the Phoenix Saga, and you got into Crisis, and you got into these books where it's like, no, we're going to kill some characters. It's going to be a major shocking death, and the heroes are going to be disillusioned, and it's going to force them to wrestle with their own mortality. And those comics sold very, very well. The problem is, up until, I don't know, 2008 or so, you couldn't kill off a character every year. You just, you couldn't do imagine how absurd it would be if you had an event every year where you killed off a major character. Eventually, you'd have to start bringing them back to life, and it would blow up the whole thing. Well, we obviously did get to that point where it was like, who's going to die this event? And then it was 2 people are going to die per event. Oh my goodness. To where it really got just absolutely ludicrous. I mean, I think that the biggest example that there's been a few, but Fear itself, which was an event that kind of warrants a whole video of just as a cluster of bad decisions. But you had Thor die and then get immediately reborn. And we knew he wasn't really going to die. You had Bucky Barnes get murdered as a shocking moment in the comic, and then of course he comes back to life, and or he wasn't actually dead in the first place. Yeah, they actually did a funeral kind of in memoriam issue of Bucky, where it was revealed he was not dead in his memorial issue. It's like that's a neat trick. You didn't even get. You could have had a memorial issue and then a rebirth issue. You didn't even wait for the. You missed out on your rebirth sales bump. I'm just saying. But generally speaking, this idea of we're going to go dark equated to we're going to take it seriously. This is now things are getting real. Now things are getting serious, which was a message to comic buyers to say, now you should buy. Now you should jump in on this storyline because we're tired of screwing around, and people are going to die and some major things are going to happen. It's going to be ugly, and what will happen next? You gotta buy in. So it was always seen within comic publishers, I mean, Marvel and DC in particular, and they're the 2 giants, of course, that when you're going to go for a serious storyline, it was often used as a sales bump technique. It was used as a way to say, this is maybe a struggling title, and we're going to do something kind of dark and gritty, and we're going to do some things that you don't expect your major characters to do, and that's the whole gimmick that we have in play. And it worked very successfully. I would say the 90s, the 80s to some extent, the 90s for sure, early 2000s. And then it did start to lose steam because, they go to that well once too often. I'd like to think, and this is my own personal view, maybe not accurate at all, but this is the way I look at it. I think Mark Miller, who did The Authority and did, a bunch of other little storylines, when he came in and did the Ultimate Universe, but also he did kind of this more serious take. And it almost felt to me like he was making fun of other writers and their serious takes. And what I mean by, like, he did his Fantastic Four run with Brian Hitch that a lot of people kind of forgotten about, and it featured Doctor Doom, getting kind of just his master and some really destructive stuff, a counter Earth, and there was a more serious take on it, but it didn't feel completely serious. It felt like almost a bit of a parody. And in comparison to what Hickman then came in and did with the Council of Reeds and some very, very dark stuff, killing off the Human Torch, but not really. He was in the negative zone, a lot of that stuff. It felt like Miller's stuff to me always felt like somebody kind of making fun of these super serious comics, even though he was doing serious stuff himself. And so I always felt like he was kind of the person that put out a lot of these comics using this format, didn't take it completely seriously, and kind of exposed the whole, ultra dark kind of way. And then, of course, he left to do his own Millerverse stuff, and other writers came in and kept trying to do those dark storylines. So at that point, nobody really took them seriously anymore. They'd seen how they go, and they see how they're marketed and they're billed, and it never had the same punch that his original work did, or it's not his, but the stuff that came before it. Like, it's kind of like Frank Miller. You can't go back to Frank Miller and taking everything really seriously if you've gone through a Mark Miller storyline. Once you've gone through that, you can't kind of reverse course and then suddenly everything's super serious again. It makes it hard. I don't know, that little segue on me. There's a lot to be said about some of these creators and kind of what they do and where they come from. And Mark Miller is an interesting one because I always felt like he fit a very unique part of comic history, and then he went off and did his own creator-owned stuff and kind of had his own successes there. But he always felt like a bit of an outsider, even though at the same time he had a hand in some of the biggest kind of moments, both at DC and Marvel during that time. So, but generally speaking, comics, when they go dark, it's not necessarily. A lot of people like to say it's the writer who wants to take on more serious tones, but more often than not, it's the writer is trying to cash in and do something that is going to be a little bit more shocking, a little bit unheard of, and is going to create that sales bump that a lot of these titles need. If you actually look at comics and when they actually tip into darker storylines or more aggressive kind of moments, most of the time it's immediately following a sales decline, where that attitude had kind of come up. But the title is a little too lighthearted, a little too didn't take itself seriously. So we need to kind of up the stakes a little bit, and that's going to bring readers back to the table. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And like I said, it's a lot of diminishing returns these days. It means about as little as saying a major hero is going to die during this event. I mean, you remember War of the Realms, where Loki got basically eaten, and it was like, I remember the solicitations, like, you'll never believe who dies. It's like, well, you're right. We won't believe, because nobody's going to really die. I mean, Loki died in Siege, too. And I mean, I'm sure there's others out there. Whatever. Anyway, what do you think? Are there other reasons why comics go dark? Is there something maybe that's less callous than a pure sales bump going on? Let me know your comments below, what you think about it. Like, subscribe, introduce the channel to a friend who would really appreciate that. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. Ask questions there. Thanks for listening.